Hello, everyone. My name is Julie McVey, and this is Unordinary Made Ordinary, where we talk about extraordinary experiences of everyday people. And today, our guest is Mark Anthony, psychic explorer, also known as a psychic lawyer. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Julie. It's great to be here. I've been looking forward to this interview quite a bit.
Me too. I am so pleased that you are here. I really appreciate you taking this time. And what I like to do in the beginning of the conversation is have my guest just share a little bit of your background.
Well, I'm known as the psychic lawyer because I'm a psychic medium and I'm also an attorney, and I'm licensed to practice law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and before the United States Supreme Court. I'm known as the psychic explorer because I've spent a good deal of my life traveling around the world to mystical and spiritual locations. I love ancient mysteries, supernatural phenomenon, myths and legends. And, to me, that's, people say, well, what do you do for fun? It's like, well, that, because I just think it's just absolutely fascinating. And as a psychic medium, I communicate with spirits. This is an ability that runs in my family on both my mother's and father's side of the family for generations. Both my mother and father had these abilities. My dad was a NASA engineer. Before that, he was a Navy SEAL. My mother was an artist and commercial illustrator and designer. So, we were a all-American, typical family next door, sort of. And I'm the first person in the family to go public with my abilities. And my latest book is The Afterlife Frequency. My earlier books are Evidence of Eternity, and my first book was Never Letting Go. And The Afterlife Frequency, the subtitle is The Scientific Proof of Spiritual Contact and How That Awareness Will Change Your Life. Because, Julie, I believe that everything is explainable. There is a scientific, logical explanation for everything. I mean, in some instances, we may not have the technology yet to detect something or to objectively analyze it, but that doesn't mean that we won't. And this extends to spirit communication, whether it's through a medium or a visitation, a near-death experience, shared death experience, deathbed vision, out-of-body experience. All of it is explainable through quantum physics and through other disciplines within science. And that's what I'm introducing in the Afterlife Frequency.
Wow, fascinating. I would love to hear a little bit, if it's okay, about your years growing up, because you discovered you were a medium at a very young age, and it was just a normal part of your life because your parents were both mediums. That's incredible.
Yeah, my dad had gotten out of the Navy, and here he is, this, 20, I think he was like 22, SEAL, all full of himself. And it was so funny hearing my parents talk about, when they told me they both passed, but I used to love hearing their stories. And Dad said, so here I am at this dance. It was like a USO dance. He said, and I see this foxy looking dame. He's talking about my mom. And she was a couple years younger than him, but he thought she was maybe 30 because my mother worked at a high-end retailer and she used to get all the latest designer fashions for wholesale. So Mom, when she went out, she was decked to the nines. And they were both really good dancers. My parents were amazing ballroom dancers.
Oh.
That is not a trait I inherited from them. I have got to be the worst dancer ever, but they were like, was it Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers? I mean, they just do all this. Yeah, they really were just amazing. And after a couple of dates, my mother said, I got to tell you something. And she said, I see spirits. And my dad was like, oh my God, so do I. And my mother said that when she met my dad, obviously, they were both young and they were very, very attractive people, but it was deeper than that. It went beyond the superficial. And so they connected on a very spiritual level. And the funny thing is, Julie, the two sides of the family could not possibly have been more different. My dad's family, they were Baptists from Pennsylvania. And I believe, no, I don't believe, I know that let me see, great great grandfather was a Baptist minister that founded the church in the town that my dad grew up in. But
Mm.
my father, he had four siblings, three sisters and a brother, and his sister Marjorie, like him, was a medium, as was his mother Isabel and his maternal grandmother Grace. But they had to keep it real quiet. It was, and it was funny because Dad was telling me that every Thursday afternoon, his sister Marjorie and his mother and his grandmother said they were having the ladies over for bridge. So, he used to, he worked, and they had a big piece of land, and they, it was a farm. And he said one Thursday afternoon, he was about 13 years old, he's listening through the door, and they were doing readings for women in the neighborhood, but they, because these women would say, oh, we're going over there to play bridge.
Yep.
And so that's how they kept it very clandestine and very quiet.
Wow.
Meanwhile, in North New Jersey, my mother's family had come over from Italy. And my mother's maternal grandmother, her name was Giovanna, and she was known in the Italian community of New York, Little Italy, and North New Jersey as the woman who knows things.
Mm.
And she was actually treated with great respect in the Catholic Italian community. And church officials used to meet with her. Nuns, priests, even cardinals would come and talk to her. And in fact, in 2016, PBS did this 4-hour special called The Italian Americans. And they did an entire segment about Giovanna and referenced her psychic abilities, which is really cool.
Wow.
I remember watching it and going, oh my gosh, and of course, like every commercial break, one of my cousins would be on the phone like, did you see that? And we were talking about that. So these abilities have run literally for centuries in my family. And when I was about 3.5, I started talking to my invisible friends. Now, generally for a toddler, it's not unusual to have invisible friends, but when mommy and daddy can see who I'm talking to, and I was like, oh, he's got it. And I remember dad saying, he's got it. Like that, because my father was worried about my personal safety.
Mm.
And
Wow.
well, the reason for that is 20 years or so before I was born, his sister Marjorie, a very gifted medium, she was married, unfortunately, to this religious zealot. And I'm being kind, just calling him a zealot. And he did not approve of or appreciate her beautiful gift. And he was a machinist. He worked at a steel factory, steel plant in Harris, I think it was Harrison, Pennsylvania. So he's getting ready to go to work one morning, Julie, and Marjorie wouldn't let him go. She basically threw a fit. She said, I get this terrible feeling.
Oh.
I know something horrible is going to happen. And they had a big argument, but he finally gave in and goes, all right, fine, I'll stay. Well, that day, a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams, and the cable snapped and it crushed the machine shop that he worked in and killed everybody in it.
Mm.
And instead of him being grateful, his fears about her intensified, and he conspired with a psychiatrist who diagnosed her as schizophrenic.
Mm.
And one night, this ambulance came to her house, and she says, what's this? And these men in white coats came, and they grabbed her, put her into a straitjacket. She was screaming.
Wow.
And they took her to a mental institution where she was subjected to electroshock therapy for a period of 6 months. And so this all happened years before I was born, and they damaged her brain so much that she never again talked about spirits or her abilities. So here I am at age 3.5, and my dad was like, oh my God. Oh my God. He was scared for me. He was a Navy SEAL. His job was to protect people. And my dad, he wanted to protect me. And I started first grade when I was 5, and he sat me down and he said, Mark, you don't talk to anybody about these things except your mother and I.
Yeah.
And then as I got older and I heard what had happened to Marjorie, then I understood. So
Sure.
I know that that's a long story, but when people ask, well, tell us about your family, it's like, oh, it can
Yeah.
fill books, which so far it's a big part of 3 of my books.
Indeed. Oh my word. So for you as a kid, though, this was just normal. It was you didn't think anything of it. So did you assume, oh yeah, my out friends probably see these people too, these invisible friends?
I did until and you got to realize when I started school, I didn't just start school, I started Catholic school.
Oh,
And
right. Okay.
my mother's family had, they were Italian, they were Catholic, and
Yeah.
so
Wow.
I thought, oh, great, because here I am in first grade and they're teaching us religion, and we have all these supernatural entities. You've got God the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, you've got Mother Mary, you've got angels and saints and all these entities. And I figured out pretty quickly you don't talk about it.
That
And
must have been
so
a
I
little
kept
confusing. I mean,
yeah, it was. But the really wonderful thing, Julie, about my family is my mother was so interesting. She used to read about Buddhism and Hinduism, and she was meditating all the time. And so when we'd be having dinner, we'd be talking about Jesus, and we talk about Yogananda Paramahansa, and then we talk about Buddha. And so we always had these really fascinating
wow.
discussions about philosophy and interfaith ways of approaching things, because we realized that when people tell me, well, there's only one way to God, and inevitably it's through their dogma,
Yeah.
their scripture, their clerics, their we would like just be very polite and smile and there's an old Hindu saying that there are many paths up the mountain, but the only person on the wrong path is the one who runs around the mountain telling everyone else their path is the wrong direction.
Oh, very interesting. I like that. And I love that your parents they were religious sort of, but then they were so open with you. And siblings, you had siblings as
Yeah,
well?
I have an older
And
brother and an older sister, and they're very intuitive. They tend to have premonitions of things that come to pass, but they're not mediums. And
interesting.
so there's different types of psychic abilities. People tend to lump us into the same category, and I always
Yeah.
get these facetious people on social media or whatever. Well, if you're so psychic, why don't you just get lottery numbers?
Yes, of
Well,
course.
it's like, well, first off, it doesn't mean I haven't asked, and I'm open to it. But what you need to realize is perhaps they will give me lottery numbers,
Hmm.
but they don't necessarily give me when that number combination is going to come out. So they may give me 6 winning numbers,
Interesting.
which will come out 11 years from next Wednesday.
Oh my word. You know what's so interesting that you all have sort of naturally these giftings. And you had said that you did not inherit the dancing ability of your parents, but it sounds like you feel like you inherited this is some kind of genetic thing that's passed down through the family.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it's genetic, because in my books, I talk about the role of genetics. I mean, there's a reason why you look like your parents.
Yeah,
There's a reason that diseases run in certain families, certain types of cancer.
true.
All right. There's 2 types of traits. There's dominant traits and recessive traits. And the
Hmm.
reason I'm holding up my hands is it is a dominant genetic trait to be right-handed. That's why 90% of the people in the world are right-handed.
Yep.
And a recessive genetic trait would be left-handedness, because roughly 10% of the people in the world are left-handed, and left-handedness tends to run in families, and it will skip a generation.
Hmm.
Okay. And that's just one example. Like in my family, having brown hair and brown eyes is a dominant trait, although every couple generations someone with blue eyes pops up. So when you have 2 parents with the same recessive genetic trait, in my family it's psychic and mediumistic abilities, which I
Huh.
view as an enhanced sensitivity to frequency then the likelihood of one of their offspring, one of their children, having those traits increases exponentially. So everybody is capable of receiving messages or being aware of messages from spirits. Everyone is capable of having a mediumistic and or a psychic experience, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's a medium or a psychic. For example, you and I can both swim. Okay, we can jump in a pool and do some laps and slosh around, but that doesn't mean that we're going to win gold medals in the Olympics for swimming. We can probably both do mathematics, but we're not going to come up with something like Stephen Hawking did.
Right.
People are just better at, different things.
Right. No, right. Like I'm a singer. I was just kind of born with a voice, but both of my parents do have a bit of a singing voice. So I don't know. And you can kind of teach singing to others, but some are easier to teach than others. But so do you feel this is a recessive trait, the mediumship ability?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Without a doubt. This is a recessive trait because, and like I indicated, my father, his sister, his mother, his maternal grandmother, my mother, her maternal grandmother, and there's other people in my mother's family that have these abilities. So, we see that it runs strong in both sides of my family. And that's why I believe that I have the abilities to the extent that I do.
now would you differentiate between mediumship and learning to, after death communication, learning to communicate with your loved ones who've passed on? Because I know a lot of my listeners, that's something they're very interested in. They want to be able to connect with their loved ones.
Mediumship is communicating with spirits. After death communication is a broader definition of that. And
okay.
After death communication comes in many different forms. For example, let's say you want to talk to your deceased loved ones and you come to me and I'm a medium and I facilitate the communication between you and your loved ones in spirit. Well, that is a form of after death communication because the people that we're talking to have passed, and so they're communicating to us after they physically died. But let's say you are sleeping and you have a dream where a deceased loved one comes and talks to you. And you wake up and you felt that it was real. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it touched your heartstrings in a way that an ordinary surrealistic dream doesn't. That too is after death communication. What if you feel that you're seeing your loved one out of the peripheral vision of your eye? Or suddenly you're
is that clairvoyance? I don't know.
Well, there's a reason. You are seeing that person, but then you turn and look and they seem to vanish. I'll come back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Or if you're driving down the highway and you just suddenly feel that you need to turn on the radio and there's that song. Or let's say that you have a near-death experience where you die and your consciousness separates from your body and you go into the light, or you go into a realm where you encounter loved ones who've died, and then you return. All these are different forms of after death communication. So is a deathbed vision. Deathbed visions are fascinating. I think we all know who Betty White is. We all know and love Betty White. And Betty White lived almost to 100 years of age. And the love of her life was Alan Ludden. They met back, I think it was in the 60s or the 70s. They were married for 20 years. She loved him passionately. He died. And she never remarried. And she always talked about Alan Ludden being the love of her life. And her last words, just before she died, she looked up and she said, Alan. That's what's known as a deathbed vision, where people who are in the transition between this world and the other side will see spirits of their loved ones. Once again, that's another form of after-death communication. So people can learn how to become more sensitive to spirits. And in my book, The Afterlife Frequency, I teach people how to do that. And it's called the raft technique. And if you'll indulge me, it's an interesting story how the raft technique came to me. I was working on the manuscript for my book, and I knew that I had to explain how people who aren't mediums can still benefit from spirit communication. A lot of my colleagues have these courses. I'll turn you into a medium, become your own medium. And all I've seen is so many people frustrated because they can't do it. And that's why I say, like, look, not everybody's a medium, but we all have the same physical, equipment, and we can use it to varying degrees. So here I am, I'm in my office. I'm all but beating my head against the wall because nothing. I just can't get anything. I had that dreaded writer's block. So I said, what the heck? I'm going to go for a walk on the beach. It's, I live right up the street from the ocean. So I'm heading down my driveway. All of a sudden I get the cold chills and tingles. So I knew this is electromagnetic activity. Spirits are around. And I feel that I need to be not going toward the beach, but instead to a bike path in the opposite direction. All right. I've been doing this my whole life. So I'm walking on the bike path. It's around midday, and I see these two objects shining in the light. And as I walk up to them, it's a nickel and a penny. And I hear my mother's voice. If their head's down, it's bad luck. And I started to laugh, Julie, because the Italian side of my family has a superstition for all occasions.
Yeah. Yep.
And then I hear Dad's voice. It's money. Grab it. And then I'm just roaring with laughter. And I'm like, hey, Mom, Dad. And I pick them up and I'm looking at the Sixth Sense. And I go, oh my God, the Sixth Sense. And I'm like, okay, Mom, Dad, what are you trying to tell me?
Yeah.
Immediately, I see an image of my father in my mind's eye. Now, he was a Navy SEAL, scuba diver, swimming instructor, taught all the kids, tons of kids how to swim at the YMCA. And I see him standing in the ocean. He's holding this blue canvas raft. It was this raft that, like, way back when, he used to have like yellow ends to it, like these rubber yellow ends, and this blue heavy canvas raft. And I'm like, raft. And then I hear my parents' voices. Teach people to recognize signs from spirits, accept the contact is real, feel it without overthinking, trust the message. And I go, raft. And so I ran back and the words just flew out of me.
Wow.
And I got it all down. And then I realized it wasn't just for situations like that. They walked me through it to show how this can happen to people, how you'll get guided into a particular place. You're in the right place at the right time.
Perfect.
Yeah. But you can also use raft when you're going to a medium. Don't overthink things, feel it without overthinking.
Okay.
Same thing, interpreting a dream you have. If you have a death experience, if you're at a deathbed vision and a shared death experience, which is when people are in close proximity to somebody who's dying, they will see the spirits the person's interacting with, and they may also see the energy of the person leave their body at the point of death. Shared death experiences are very widely reported, and that's something I also explain. So the raft technique can be used to help you make sense out of a broad spectrum of after-death communication.
Very cool. Now, I didn't mention this to you before we hit record, but one of the other reasons I started doing having these conversations is because a couple of years ago when I started meditation, I started having out-of-body experiences. So where does that fall in with this?
That ties into my theory, which I introduced in the afterlife frequency, known as the electromagnetic soul, the EMS. People say the electromagnetic soul. Well, let's take a step back here.
Okay.
We know from science everything's made of molecules. Molecules are made of atoms. Atoms are composed of electrons, protons, and neutrons. And those subatomic particles are made of yet a smaller particle, quantum, which is pure electromagnetic energy. Everything on the subatomic level is made of electromagnetic energy. Now, you start trying to wrap your head around this. That means, Julie, that our bodies, our brains, but also the chairs we're sitting in, the radio waves that this show is being broadcast on, the light we see from the sun, the surface of Mars, I mean, the distance between our galaxy and others, everything is energy on the subatomic level. So we know from the laws of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another.
Mm-hmm.
Every great spiritual teacher, from ancient Egypt through ancient Hindustan in India, through Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Yogananda Paramahansa, Gandhi, St. Francis of Assisi, Native American shamans, everyone teaches that the soul, the consciousness, our spirit pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. So I developed the term the electromagnetic soul to describe what we really are, which is pure consciousness that is eternal electromagnetic energy. So in your out-of-body experience, we must remember that the brain does not create consciousness. Your brain hosts consciousness. Think of your brain like a computer hard drive. Your computer didn't create Windows 10 or Windows 11 or the Apple programs or whatever, operating system you're using, much less the data on it, but it hosts it. Mm-hmm. And when your hard drive crashes, hopefully it gets uploaded to the cloud. All right. So it's the same thing.
Huh.
Okay. So when we die, our electromagnetic soul, the EMS, moves on. Now, with out-of-body experiences, your body maintains it's alive, obviously, and you're able to project your consciousness. So energetically, it remains tethered to your body through what's known as quantum entanglement. Now, I'll spare you all the technical discussions there, but that's why you can have an out-of-body experience. That's also why I've been able to communicate with people who are in comas and people who are still physically alive, yet either considered brain dead or close to death. If I may, recently, this is a tough one, so I may get a bit emotional here. I got a call from a friend of mine, and her name is Mary. And I knew Mary when we were kids. We used to ride the school bus together. And she goes, Mark, you've got to help me. And she said, it's my son, Mikey. He's on life support. And the doctor said he's brain dead, and they want me to remove life support. Now, I didn't know Mikey. I knew that Mary was married to a gentleman named Michael. And apparently Michael Jr., they called Mikey, and they have two other children, Sam and Mally, their daughter, Mally. And she explained to me that Mikey, he was like the greatest kid ever. Good student, had a basketball scholarship to college. He was a strong kid. He used to stick up for kids that were being bullied. I mean, he was just a nice kid. And he was at a basketball game, and he came home and he said, I have blurred vision in my eyes. Long story short, an MRI found a brain tumor, which is DIPG, diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma. And this horrific cancer strikes children and very young adults. It's incurable because it attaches to the brain stem and it's inoperable.
Wow.
He went through all the treatments, and there's treatments, but there's no cure, because Mikey, he was going to fight it. So she said, can you communicate with my parents? I need to know what to do. Oh. So I said, I'll do my best. And immediately two spirits came forward. She identified them as her parents. And then another spirit came forward to go, okay, this is a young guy, early 20s. Oh. And I said, he said, I didn't mean to do it. I was hot and I wanted to cool off. I go, does that make any sense? And she goes, yes. She said, we found Mikey was home recovering from chemotherapy, and I'd gone out. When I got home, he was floating face down in the pool. And she was like, we didn't know why he went in the pool. And he said, I was hot and I wanted to cool off, and he passed out. Wow. And then he drowned, but the paramedics got him breathing again. So he's in the hospital. They're saying he's brain dead. And his message was, I'm at heaven's door. I'm there, but you're not ready to make the decision, and you'll know when you are ready. Now, skeptics will say, well, of course, any medium would have said something like that. But skeptics, this was just the beginning. The next day, I got a call, and Mary, her husband, Michael, and her two children, Sam and Mally, were on the phone. And Mikey said, "You're almost ready." And then he said, "Giorgio and Greggy." I go, "Giorgio and Greggy?" And his father, Michael, goes, "Oh my God." He said, "There was an inside joke between Mikey and me. He used to call me Giorgio. It was a joke." He goes, "Nobody knows that." I said, "Well, who's Greggy?" I can't think. They go, "Mark, we got to go." Well, the doctor had arrived and they made the decision to remove life support. And he transitioned soon after. And that night, the family, they were at home and they were devastated. And there's a knock on the door, and they answer the door, and it's this young man that they hadn't seen in over 10 years, hadn't seen or heard from him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a foster child that they'd taken in. Now he was, in his early 20s. His name was Greggy. And he said, "I don't know why, but I just felt I needed to visit you folks tonight." And he didn't know anything about what had happened to Mikey. So Greggy shows up. So,
Wow.
Well, it gets even more intense. So 3 months later, I did a reading for the entire family. And Mikey's last message was, "When you see Mars, think of me." And his mom goes, "Mark, what does that mean?" I said, "Your guess is as good as mine." But you see, with messages from spirits, they're like flowers. They unfold, they bloom, they blossom, and they unfold. And it can take time to figure this out. She goes, "Okay." A week later, she calls me. She said, "Mark, last night, the kids were over, Sam and Mally, and we were in the backyard, and it was a cloudy night, and we were grilling burgers. And we were talking about Mikey and how much we loved him and how much we missed him. And the clouds started to clear and the stars came out. And our son Sam pointed, he goes, "Hey, look at that big orange star. That's Mars." And she said, "Then we all realized, we all knew, when you see Mars, think of me."
Wow.
Now,
okay, that's confusing. Like, so they can see into the future somehow. I don't
they can
get how
see
that
the
works.
future. This is because of my theory of the electromagnetic soul. Quantum physicists, since the time of Albert Einstein through Stephen Hawking and through Max Tegmark today, have theorized that on the quantum level, on that electromagnetic level, time does not exist. And that everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen is occurring simultaneously. And, philosophers have been debating since the beginning of time, what is time? See, we think time exists because we measure it in basis of light and dark. We're on a planet that rotates, so we figure we divide it into days. And also we're born, we physically grow old if we're lucky, and then we die. So we think of time in a linear fashion.
Yeah.
If you went up to a whiteboard and you put a dot on there, then you would draw a line moving to the left, and that's your timeline. We've all had those in history class.
Yep.
Well, this does not occur on the subatomic level, which is why and how spirits are able to discern future events. So this is, and Mikey's story is not in my book because it happened after my book was released, although there are other stories in the book which are every bit as compelling about spirits seeing the future and the explanation of how it happens. And I describe it through space-time. Now, with my book, the Afterlife Frequency, I know I'm talking a lot about quantum physics. Don't be afraid. Look, I was a trial lawyer for a long time, and I've tried over 100 jury trials. And I vowed never to bore my audience the way I was bored with legal opinions and law books. I explain the concepts in a way anybody can understand it, and then I illustrate all of them with stories. Cool. Some are going to make you cry, some are going to make you laugh, and some are like, OMG. But that's how I write, because I want my books to educate, entertain, and read like a juicy novel, but I want you coming away from it understanding things that you may not have before. And so, because people go, quantum physics, and it's like, yeah, but it's the theory of everything. Okay. And if explained properly, it's nothing to be intimidated by.
Wow. Okay. So this is exciting because I kind of am intrigued with quantum physics, but a lot of the time it does kind of get a little too much for me and over my head. So
Well, it's the
this is
math
perfect.
part. Yeah, the math part, when you start looking at the calculations, I'm like, what's funny is Albert Einstein was really bad at math, but he was conceptual. And he got to the point where he'd be working on stuff, and this is before calculators. So there would be a team of math whizzes working with him, and he'd say, okay, do this, do this, do this, and they'd be doing the math. I mean, he would come up with many of the formulas. We all hear about E equals MC squared. Okay. There's maybe a dozen people in the world that really understand what that means. But the thing is, we can all get the basic concepts. And so once you start getting the concepts, you don't necessarily have to worry about understanding the mathematical equation unless you're extremely, mathematically gifted. And that's why, people shouldn't be intimidated about understanding these things. People say that, God works in mysterious ways. Well, quantum physics is pretty darn mysterious. And Albert Einstein said that religion without science is no. Oh gosh. Basically, what he said is religion without science is lame. And he saw a connection between the two of them.
Okay.
Nikola
You can't
Tesla,
have one without the other, maybe. I don't know.
exactly. And Nikola Tesla said that what one person calls God, another calls the laws of physics.
True.
And so I'm
Yep.
not negating God at all. In fact, the Afterlife Frequency, since its release in October of 2021, it's up for a Pulitzer Prize.
Yay.
It's endorsed by film icon and spiritual Shirley MacLaine. It's on its way to a third printing, and it was just designated one of the top 16 books about faith in God. And I was so honored when I saw that.
Wow.
And on that list, my book was listed as number one. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And the Dalai Lama's latest book was also on that list. So it's been very humbling and very, I'm very honored to see how my book has been received. This is my life's work, is to help people understand. And where this comes from, Julie, I was 8 years old and I was standing next to my dad and we were looking at stars. He was a NASA engineer. Dad was my hero. He worked with astronauts. Okay. And I was an 8-year-old kid that liked, Star Trek and all that stuff. And I remember Dad saying to me, he goes, Mark, there's no such thing as a mystery. There are only questions for which we do not yet have the answer. And if enough research, enough funding, and enough dedication is put into anything, we're going to come up with the answer, and it's going to have a scientific explanation.
I love that. And this might be outside of the scope of what you do or know, but speaking of stars, what about beyond the spirit realm and into extraterrestrials? Do you have any communication or have any opinions about ETs out there somewhere?
Oh, yes, I do.
Oh, okay, cool. Do you want to share just a little bit about your...
Absolutely. In my work, see, I also have a show, The Psychic and the Doc, on Thursdays, and people can find out about that through my website, afterlifefrequency.com. I've had the opportunity to interview some of the world's leading UFO experts, but in my work as a medium, I've also conducted readings for people who have been abducted, or they claim to have been abducted. And after the connections I make with them and what their spirits talk about, it is just amazing.
Okay.
And essentially every spirit that I communicate with, that when we get on, if they bring up the topic of extraterrestrial life, they basically say, yeah, it's like no big deal. Yeah, they exist. Now, the question is, and in the last year, the U.S. government, the Pentagon, and not just the U.S., but other countries' military agencies have said UFOs are real. Okay, this is no longer, oh, you're not, if you've seen this, we have governments coming out and saying UFOs are real. And the accepted term now is UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon. But now there's also USOs, unidentified submersible objects, because some Navy pilots have been tracking some of them. These objects are able to outmaneuver Navy fighter jets. Okay. And then let's face it, U.S. Air Force is the best in the world, and we have the most maneuverable and sophisticated jets, and these things literally do rings around anything we've got, and then they go into the ocean. That's why they're called unidentified submersible objects. So what are they doing down there? Is that where their base is? So they're these interesting discussions. But I was talking to the former head of the U.S. Army's UFO project back when it was secret, back in the 70s and the 80s. And he said that, well, to understand a UFO, it's as complicated as cancer. And also he was very guarded about what he said. So I know that they know more than they're telling us. But he said, from what we can determine, a UFO is not a tin can flying through space for thousands of years. What they are is an interdimensional vehicle. Fascinating. I call what I do interdimensional communication, because we in the material world are communicating with another dimension. So he said that it appears that they're able to create an energy field to where the UFO, the craft, can jump from one coordinate to another within seconds without violating the laws of physics. This is known as the Alcubierre effect. And Alcubierre is a Mexican physicist who came up with, okay, here's a piece of paper, all right? So say that this is where the alien planet is, and this is Earth, and they're 1,000 light years apart. That means you'd have to be traveling at the speed of light for 1,000 years to get there. A light year, the distance light travels in a year, is something like 5.3 trillion miles. Okay, so let's multiply 5.3 trillion by 1,000. All right. Well, the Alcubierre effect, and see, Albert Einstein said that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. Well, that kind of kills this, but the Alcubierre effect is you create an energy field around the ship that enables a curvature in space-time, so that you jump from one coordinate to the next within a few seconds. And because you're sort of cheating, you're folding space-time, you're not going faster than the speed of light, you're changing the dynamic. Now, I'm giving a very, very basic understanding of this, but it certainly makes sense. Now, here's the best part. To create that amount of energy, first off, we don't have the technology, but physicists believe that we might be able to at some point. But the energy field would have to be created, so the scientists say, external to the bubble. In other words, the mothership creates the bubble that the projectile goes. So it gets here. Is there something here now which is able to create the bubble to send it back? I know that I'm really getting out there with this stuff, but you asked.
I was just thinking, oh, I asked for it. Man, wow. Okay, so many, all of these subjects though are so fascinating and fun for me, and you have a little bit of all of them in your life experiences. That's fantastic. I mean, it's, I'm really curious. I know we're kind of running out of time, but I was wanting to ask you, you have children?
I do not.
Oh, you don't? Okay, because I was going to say, did they get this or what?
I got nieces and nephews, and
Okay.
I always like being the cool uncle, the one that would take them,
I'm
and oh
you're
man, they always wanted to spend. And now they're older. It's like, yeah, whatever.
really? Oh, I mean, you're
Well,
a
I mean,
cool uncle.
I try to be. I try to be. Yeah, it's like this time around, I didn't have any kids, but that's why I've spent so much of my time on my work, and I also realized that was why I wasn't supposed to, and I think kids are awesome. I love kids.
I was
Uh,
just wondering if it was
yeah.
still running, being passed on in the family, the mediumship abilities, and
Oh, I'm seeing
this,
it.
you're seeing it.
Yeah, I'm seeing it in the nieces and nephews. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And this time around, that was another question I wanted to get to. What are your views on reincarnation? Is that part?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's naive to think that it doesn't exist. And reincarnation, I address in Evidence of Eternity in depth, but also I reference it and explain it in the Afterlife Frequency. And once again, the electromagnetic soul is the explanation for
Mm,
reincarnation. Because when we leave, think of our world as AM radio and the other side is FM radio. Okay, so when we leave AM radio, we go as a spirit into FM. Okay, we're jumping from one dimension to another, but it's the zone in between. Okay, and so the zone in between is where NDEs occur. This is where deathbed visions, spirit communication, because it's an overlap of the two dimensions. And reincarnation is the electromagnetic soul then returns and attaches to a new host, meaning a fetus. So there is a scientific explanation for reincarnation because once again, energy, neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. And the idea of going to an eternal damnation of hell, I mean, this is all medieval, superstitious nonsense designed to frighten people. And as a Catholic, and I was raised and groomed to be a priest, I always, envisioned heaven as sort of the Michelangelo painting where we get to hang out and drink fine red wine with angels. But once again, that is an artist's conception of another dimension.
it's so interesting when you bring up the frequencies. Um, for me personally, when I do go out of body, I know this sounds a little strange. I do talk about it a little bit on my show, other episodes, but when I'm in that altered state between, I call it between sleep and awake.
Yeah.
It's my body's asleep, my consciousness is still awake. I can't tell you how often I hear frequencies. I hear like it's almost like static, and then it will tune in and I'll hear conversations, and then it will tune out and I'll hear a whole different conversation. Even radio stations, like I will hear announcers and things, but it's so fascinating.
There you go. See, you just basically made my case. Because you're sensitive to frequency. And what's really good about what you're doing, Julie, is that you're naturally applying the raft technique. You're recognizing the frequency, you're accepting it as real, you're feeling it without overthinking it. And that yeah, it's
That's a hard one.
that's the hard one. That's where people
For me.
really botch it up, and then trust it. And the feeling without overthinking. Like I was doing a reading the other day for somebody, and I said that the spirits are saying that you do a lot of strength training. No, I don't do any strength training. I'm in karate. Okay. Talk about overthinking a message and immediately shooting it down.
Right.
Well, I thought strength training meant weights. Well, see, because right there, you're overthinking, jumping
Absolutely.
to conclusions. I don't know this person. I'm doing the reading over the phone. I can't see what they look like. I don't know if they're in physical, tip-top shape or what have you. And that's just a minor example of how people overthink it. I was on a TV show. I don't mean to laugh, but and see, when I'm on TV, I always have to do everything live. I don't have the benefit of all being edited down. So I'm doing.
I don't edit this, by the way. So.
Well, no, I'm talking about
so
like these TV shows with mediums. They show a 30-second clip.
Oh, right.
Oh my God. Because they take an hour reading and edit it down to the 30-second wow moments.
Yeah.
So here I am on a TV show, And this woman, I get the spirit of her son. She stands up, and granted, okay, I'm used to being on TV. I'm used to being interviewed, but it's still, it's still nerve wracking. I mean, you're on TV and there's lights and camera and there's an audience. Well, this lady was clearly petrified, and her son's spirit kept giving me cross, cross. I'm seeing a cross. I'm getting cross. No, no, no. And we go to the commercial break. So there's a 4 minutes of commercial break, and she's standing there staring at me, and her husband's sitting next to her, and he raises his hand. Now we're on the commercial break, and says, "Well, our last name is Cross." I said, "You mean
Exactly.
like your son's name?" Oh, oh. And I can hear the host of the shows next to me going like, "Ay, ay, ay." So we come back on, and the host. So during the break, they realize that their name was Cross, and they're looking at me, and the host goes, "Mark, can you go to somebody else?" And the thing is, it's very easy for us to laugh at somebody like that, but they were nervous, they're scared, they're not on they're not on TV all the time. And they get that terror, and they just get the psychic amnesia. But that's why I always tell people, messages from spirits are not always immediately apparent. They weren't thinking, but in other situations, it takes time to figure out what it means. And so that's why, you've got to patience is a virtue when it comes to the unfolding and understanding how messages from spirits will eventually be revealed.
Very good. Yes, absolutely. It's just, I just really relate to that overthinking thing. And it's like retraining myself to just be patient, don't overthink, accept it. It's just important.
But see, overthinking in analytical professions, I'm an attorney.
Right.
Okay. In analytical professions, you're supposed to overthink things. Yeah. And so, but in spirit communication, you have to go with the very first thing that hits you. Don't overthink it. Get the data down, get the information after the reading, then feel free to hyperanalyze. But if you start hyperanalyzing everything as it comes through, all you're going to do is create an energetic block, and the spirits will back off.
Okay, that's good to know. I don't want to finish this conversation. I want to keep going, but I'd love for you to sort of share what do you feel like your purpose is? Because you said this is your life work, and what do you feel like is the main purpose that you'd want to get across to the listeners? Or there's probably more than one.
Well, it became very clear to me 2 weeks after my mother died, and I was practicing law full time, and I was driving back from court. And people think if you're a medium, you don't hurt when someone you love dies. And that is not true at all. And all of a sudden, a wave of grief hit me, and I was really hurting. And I pulled over into this parking lot of a strip mall, and I thought, all right, let me get my act together. Because I was a senior partner in a law firm, and walking and crying wasn't exactly going to be, helping my image at the firm. And I'm sitting in my car, and all of a sudden this flash of light goes off in my head, and I instinctively looked at the passenger seat, and for a brief second, I saw the silhouette of my mother in this silver white light. And I heard her voice in my head, and she said, "You've been given the gift of mediumship so that you would not be crushed by grief, but now you must help those who are suffering with theirs. And your life's purpose is to help people understand that God exists, that heaven exists, that our souls are immortal living beings, that you can communicate with souls, and we will be reunited when it is your time to leave the material world." And I'm like, I remember I broke out into a sweat, and I sank back into my seat. Talk about an aha moment. A lot of people say, oh, I had this enlightening and transformative experience, and it was gradual. Mine was kind of like a fire hose right in the face.
Wow.
And I'm very thankful for it, because from that point on, everything in my life changed. Within a year, I was out of the practice of law. I was on this path. My first book came out and I've never looked back. And so that's
Oh,
my message. That's my purpose.
wow. That's beautiful. I'm just like, I have to hold back tears because that's really just a beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful moment for
I
you.
get, I've told the story, a number of times, and it still really gets to me
Mm,
because we never get over the loss of a loved one.
mm.
It's something that we carry with us, and grief is a journey. It's a process that we go through, and you get to the point where you learn to live with it, but that doesn't mean that it ever really stops hurting. And I do a lot of work with people who've lost children. I'm speaking this year at Helping Parents Heal in their annual convention in Arizona. And there are
Wonderful.
no words to describe the excruciating pain that parents go through when they lose children.
Yeah.
And if I can, with my work, just alleviate a drop of that pain, then that's what I'm here for.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. Um, so before we have to say goodbye and sign off, I just want to leave you with some room to share any current projects. I mean, you just finished the book, and that's a major, major project that you've completed. Came out last year?
It came
What,
out in October. It's funny because it came out on October 5th, which was the anniversary of my mother's passing. And
wow.
I remember when my publisher said, "Oh, here's the date that it's coming out," and I said, "Thanks, Mom."
I mean,
That's what I termed spiritual synchronicity.
mhm.
And so it's been, quite a whirlwind of activities since then, but I've always got a lot of projects going on. That's why if people want to find out about free events, free online events that I'm doing, and
Yes.
my tour schedule, please visit my website and sign up for my newsletter. And that's
Okay.
at afterlifefrequency.com. I'm going to be speaking at the Helping Parents Heal conference in August. In fact, I'll be speaking on April 4th for Neil Gower's Consciousness Summit, and then in
Oh,
June for Spiritual Awakenings International, and in August, Helping Parents Heal. In September, I'm the keynote speaker, I've been designated the distinguished keynote speaker at the International Association for Near-Death Studies in Salt Lake City. And then in October, I'll be in Virginia Beach for the Edgar Cayce's Ancient Mysteries Conference, where I'm presenting Sacred Astrology, the mystical magi and the mystery of the Star of Bethlehem, and how scientists and astrophysicists have discovered what we call the Star of Bethlehem, which is actually very cool.
oh
So if
man.
you want to find out about all these things, I invite
Yes.
you to visit my website, afterlifefrequency.com. You can find out about booking a reading. And please keep tuning into Unordinary Made Ordinary. And every Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, I'll be on the air with my co-host, Dr. Pat Basili, the psychic and the doc. She's a behavioral psychologist. And we take calls from listeners, and we have a lot of really interesting guests. So everybody
Cool.
can find out about that at my website, afterlifefrequency.com.
Wow, you are so busy and doing so much. And I'm going to put all these links up in the video description. So, and book, the books, links to those. And yeah, this has been so amazing. I've loved this conversation.
Oh,
And
thank
if
you.
you have any other last words, feel
Oh,
free.
yeah, I forgot. I'm a
Okay.
columnist for Best Holistic Life magazine, and you can get your free online subscription by visiting bestholisticlife.com. And the thing is, Julie, that this is for your listeners because it's all sorts of really positive and upbeat, holistic healing techniques
Oh,
and
cool.
advice and information. And there's always some good recipes. And so I kind of write on the spiritual topic. So I've got some good ones coming up, but definitely. And, thank you for having me on the show. And
Thank you.
I'm Mark Anthony, and you're listening to Unordinary made ordinary.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you to everyone listening. Yes, this is Julie McVey with Unordinary Made Ordinary, and I hope you'll join us next time for another fascinating interview. And if you did enjoy this, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like this type of content, please subscribe and hit that bell icon, and then you'll be alerted to future videos. I hope you are all having a fantastic day or evening wherever you are on the planet or off the planet. And we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.